Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Apostate Alauddin. I make YouTube videos and I host live streams discussing Islam critically, among other related topics. And if you haven't watched yesterday's live stream, if you're watching this live, welcome. Don't worry about it. And if you're watching this offline, then you might want to watch that one first. Because today I'll be I'm continuing the Dissecting Apologetics series, where I'll be dissecting the second half of Yasir Qadhi's lecture titled, what was it titled? Can you really prove Islam is true? And in the second half, he will present 10 so-called evidences or proofs that Islam is true. He's not going to go into much details about them, so I similarly will not go into details because he didn't provide any, but I still intend to demonstrate how to think critically about the stuff that he says, and how without going into too much detail in each point, there's still much to be said. So if you're new to the channel, welcome. Consider subscribing, turning on notifications, because I don't always upload regularly. So turn on notifications so you don't miss my uploads. And last thing before we begin watching the video, I'm wearing this t-shirt, ex-Muslim. It's merch by Haram Doodle. She has an awesome Instagram channel and a website, and she sells this merch on her website, which is in the link in the description. It is Ex-Muslim Awareness Month, and this merch and a bunch of other efforts have been put towards increasing the awareness, people's awareness of ex-Muslims like myself. So you'll find more information about that as well in the description. Yeah, a lot of people are noticing a different background. It's been a long time coming. It's still a work in progress, so hopefully in a few weeks or a few months it'll be all finalized. But I'm glad you all like it. Uh, I'm getting roasted before we even begin here. Master Connor says, I don't always upload regularly is a bit of an understatement. Yeah, I would say so. Let me at least be a bit favorable towards myself. So can you guys see the video? Can you hear it? Tell me if there's anything wrong with it. Let's begin.
Number two, the second truth claim that we will bring in are historical truths.
Historical. Okay, for a bit of context, in the first half, he alleged that he will discuss how do you discern or how do you assess truth claims made by religions. He doesn't quite do that. Instead, he continues to discredit skepticism and skeptics and atheists. And essentially, his thesis for most of the video is if you're unreasonably skeptic, if you're arrogant, which he keeps saying the word arrogant, nothing will ever convince you. And I talked in length about all the problems with that. We also briefly went over his first of 10 so-called proofs, which is that the Quran itself is proof. That was a bit of a doozy, but let's listen to the second reason and go forward.
Truths. Amongst them, the seerah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the character of the Prophet. The Quran itself mentions this point. If you're in any doubt, then Allah says, تَتَفَكَّرُوا, think, مَا بِصَاحِبِكُم مِّن جِنَّةٍ.
Okay, let's go back and hear again what he said. The second proof for Islam is, come on, speak, Yasir.
Historical truths.
The historical truths. What does that mean, historical truths? He doesn't quite explain what that is. He gives some examples of Muhammad and his character and stuff, which we'll listen to as well. But part of my job here is to remind you that when you're listening to a sheikh like this, don't be just led by what he says. Think about it. When he says historical proof is proof of Islam being true, what could that possibly mean? If he means that Islam or the Quran or whatever, there's documentation of things that happened historically and that they were actually conveyed accurately in the Quran, that is debatable. But even if you say, yes, there were, how does that prove that the Quran is a book from God or that Islam is true? Historic documentation and historical facts, even if they do exist, does not amount to, therefore, this is a divine book. So what exactly does he mean by historical proof?
Amongst them, the seerah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the character of the Prophet. The Quran itself mentions this point. If you're in any doubt. So
the seerah of the Prophet is the biography of the Prophet written by other people way after his death. So I'll leave it up to you to decide whether it's historically accurate or not. But he says the documentation of the Prophet's life and his character is proof that Islam is true. What does that mean?
Then Allah says, تتفكروا, think, ما بصاحبكم من جنة إن هو إلا نذير مبين. This person amongst you, he is not a madman. He is a messenger from Allah. Examine his life. Examine his character. And you will come to the conclusion, he is a Bashir and a Nadhir. And as
Bashir and Nadir means someone who is congratulating good news, and that's Bashir, and Nadir is someone who's warning you of bad news. So he says, the Quran says, if you look at the Prophet's character, you have no other conclusion except that this is a guy who actually spoke to God. Why the heck do we care? Whatever he starts his point with, the Quran says, unless the Quran says something that in and of itself is an argument, then it holds no water. So the Quran claiming something with the authority of God is not proof, does not constitute proof, because he's starting with the assumption that the Quran has been proven to be a book from God. If that was the case, what's the point of this lecture? What are we even doing here if we're starting from the conclusion? So him saying the Quran says, Allah says, if you look at Muhammad's character, you have no conclusion except that he was a prophet. Good for you. Somebody wrote in a book that claims that God said that stuff. This is just a big circle that he's going around and around like a dog chasing its tail. No insult to dogs or to Yasir Qadhi. This is just what it looks like.
As we know, for the bulk of converts of early Islam, what caused them to convert was the character of the Prophet ﷺ, interacting with him. That is a miracle.
Okay, you need to define what a miracle is, okay? Because in the previous video, he talked of miracles with examples like an angel coming down from the sky or God, booming a voice through the sky. Maybe that can be considered a miracle. But that people were swindled by a guy or convinced by a guy pitching a religion to them, that is not a miracle. The same story happens with so many religions to this day, including cults, that we know for a fact, even Muslims will clearly say there's no chance that this person spoke to God. So he says most of the early converts were convinced just by talking to the guy, and that proves that Islam is true. When he says most of the early converts, is he talking about the early days before Muhammad went to Medina and then back to Mecca? Maybe that's true. How many were they? Very, very few. But even if they were a lot of people, what does that prove? Absolutely nothing. But then after that, how did most Muslims convert to Islam after the hint conquest of Mecca?
He is a miracle. He's a walking miracle. Looking at him, Abdullah bin Salam converted to Islam, as you know the famous story. If you don't know, I give khutbahs about this. Simply looking at him, he converted to Islam. So the persona of the Prophet, now we cannot see him. So then,
that is an excellent point. We can't see him. He says this man is a walking, talking miracle. He's not walking or talking. He's been dead for a long, long time. So for that to even start to hold any water, he'd have to be here among us. And then maybe we can even start to discuss, is this man's existence a miracle? But telling stories about a legend does not make a miracle. Does not make a miracle. And he says the fact that people would convert by talking to him, have you never met a con man? I'm not calling Muhammad a con man, but this is a common theme, that con men and charismatic people and leaders and many different categories of people with special skills, personable people, can convince people without actual facts or evidence or anything, just by appealing to something or another in them. So Muhammad having convinced some people does not make it a miracle, nor does it make Islam true. It is very difficult. I feel like I'm saying very elementary stuff, but you'd be surprised. In the comments of such videos, a lot of Muslims are saying, MashaAllah, this explains everything. That's so clear. How are people not thinking for just a second about what he says?
His life, his teachings, his message, of the historical truths as well, is the success of Islam, the rapid spread of Islam. There is no other religion that spread as swiftly as Islam did, no other religion. And then the permanency, wherever Islam spread,
Pause.
It established deep organic roots.
I said pause. How rude. So, what did he say before Islam spread so quickly? And that is proof. Um, he said something about historical evidence. Sorry, we have to listen to him again. Yes, it is a bit slow today. Oh, the quality is high. Let's take you down to 720p. You don't need to be in 4K. تفضل شيخ ياسر. Go ahead.
as Islam did, no other religion. And then the permanency
Nope.
cannot see him. So then his life, his teachings, his message.
Okay, so because we cannot see Muhammad, he says it's more difficult to, see him as a walking, talking miracle. Therefore, what's the substitute for meeting the guy and actually confirming that he's a miracle? The stories that we have about him. Okay, if you go into these stories, and I will be flip-flopping between falling into the trap of arguing, the point that he's making when he says, for example, Islam is the religion that spread the fastest. You could fall into the trap and argue, well, actually, Christianity has spread faster, and actually this, and actually that. Or you could argue, so what? What does that mean? What does that criteria mean objectively about the truthfulness of Islam? So when he says Muhammad's life and his life and his character are full of flaws. Are you telling me a hadith where he talks about the permissibility of human trafficking, slavery? That's a whole contentious topic. The permissibility of trading two black slaves for one Arab slave, or I don't remember the race of the other one. That is a hadith. That is something that was thought to be a wisdom that Muhammad said, a rule that people followed. You're telling me that is perfect? That is going to convince me that this man is from God, a man who trades lives and talks about how, yeah, if you deem two black people to be worth one non-black person, that's fine. You're telling me that is evidence. What are you talking about? And then he says the spread, the quick spread of Islam. How did Islam spread so quickly? He will give us the answer. And he says the permanency of that. He will also contradict himself. Just listen.
Of the historical truths as well is the success of Islam, the rapid spread of Islam. There is no other religion that spread as swiftly as Islam did, no other religion. And then
worth reminding you again, I said this in the previous live stream. We need to stop playing their game of comparing religions only. He says, if you look at other religions, no religion spread as quickly. But why are we comparing to other religions? What value do we get from that? If we do the process of elimination and we say, well, if we select for certain criteria, then Islam wins. But that's not how you determine what the truth is. And he says no other religion has spread as quickly. Arguably, Christianity has spread very quickly, but he wouldn't see that as criteria. If we go back to, the early days of Islam, right? Say a decade after the Prophet died or something, and I ask someone who's a Muslim, why should I join Islam? What makes it true? And what would they say? Would they say, well, it's true because it spread so quickly? Well, it hadn't yet. So is that really a point of argument if it wasn't valid at the time? What would have convinced someone, what would have proven Islam while Muhammad was alive, right after he died? That would not have been a talking point because you can't rely on something that hasn't happened yet. So how could you then say the spread of Islam so quickly is a sign of anything? A lot of things spread very quickly. Plagues have spread way quicker than Islam. Does that mean that they were, agents of death sent by God? Some religious people might think so, but realistically, no. It just means that this disease, this virus, or this bacteria was that difficult to contain, and people didn't know what to do about plagues at the time. And there were a lot of unhygienic situations that caused the spread, and so on and so forth. We don't jump to the most mystical, far-fetched, magical, mythical conclusion before we eliminate realistic possibilities. Is it beyond question that a religion could spread as fast as Islam, especially when it relies heavily on military conquest? Not even close. It is so realistically human, possible within the realm of this world. It is not a miracle in any way whatsoever. And yet again, a Christian can argue that Christianity spread way faster, further. Maybe even they could argue with less military force. I mean, that's a debate. Where do we stand there? a Muslim and a Christian talking to each other, comparing which one spread faster, neither of them actually have a point to make, regardless of which religion spread faster or further. Let's keep listening. He says the permanency of Islam.
The permanency, wherever Islam spread, it established deep organic roots unless it was severed brutally by an outsider, as in Andalusia, for example.
Wherever Islam spread, it established itself and remained unless it was severed. What did Muslim conquests, and what did Muslim soldiers do to the people that they invaded? Did they not sever the religions and the cultures that were already there? Wasn't Zoroastrianism very prevalent in that region for a long, long time before Islam, and Judaism and Christianity and other polytheistic religions, till they were severed violently, till the Muslims destroyed their places of worship and their objects of worship? Didn't that happen? So he says Islam continues, like most religion, continues to fester in a region unless it is severed violently, like Islam does to other religions. He thinks he just scored, but it's the irony is palpable.
No other faith tradition can compete with this reality. Wherever Islam went, not only the swiftness of its expansion, and I've said this multiple times, without a doubt, this is a miracle for groups of Arabs of the 7th century to take on simultaneously both of the superpowers. Honestly, this is surreal. And
okay, I don't know if he understands what the word surreal or a miracle is, but if we were to look at history, and a historian might explain this better than I can, there are many empires that have lasted way longer than the Islamic empires have. You can't say that today's Muslim countries are an extension of the Islamic empires that used to exist. They're no way united. They're no way the same entity. There are empires that spread and had a lot more unity and a lot more control over the regions that they conquered for way longer than the Muslim empires have. And that was not a miracle. That is explainable. That is realistic. That happened. That is verifiable. So he seems to be very short-sighted about timescales and history. Like if in, say, 400 years from now, say Islam shrinks a lot, and I know a lot of Muslims don't think it will happen, but say that is a realistic possibility. Say the influence of Islam shrinks a lot. We would be looking at Islam the way that we look at, the Greek Empire, the Roman Empire. But he can't conceptualize that, or the ancient Egyptian Empire. Those also lasted for a long time. Some of these for thousands of years. Islam has only existed for 1400 years, and it's not an empire for all that time. Why is his bar for amazement so low and conveniently only about things that Islam has accomplished? And that's a great point, actually. Nana Boost says, humanity has existed for 300,000 years or so. Don't quote me on a number, but humanity has existed for way longer than Christianity, Islam, Judaism, the ancient Greek religion, everything. So for God to sit on his butt and keep sending messengers according to the Islamic story that the message didn't land, Allah didn't preserve the book, and so on and so forth, and Allah let the religions be corrupted until the last 1400 years where he finally gets it right. How does that make sense? On the grand scale of history, of the history of humanity, the recorded history, let alone the unrecorded history, Islam is but a blip. So for him to think this thing that I am surrounded by is so important in the world, more inflated importance than it actually is, and that is proof that it is true, he is truly, truly deluded. He acts like he's not educated, but he is. So I really wonder where that comes from.
if you understand history and you read your history, this is unbelievable.
If you understand history, it is believable. I don't think historians, secular historians, would ever come across the Islamic conquest and say, this is so unbelievable that the only explanation can be that God authorized and helped with this. If you really had any understanding of history as you are asking us to have, Yasir Qadhi, you would not be saying this drivel.
And if you understand history and you read your history, this is unbelievable. The same people who broke bread with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the same people who fasted with him, who fought at Badr and Uhud, the same people walked through the palaces of Kisra, Sassanid Persia. Unbelievable. It's surreal if you understand this point here.
It is not surreal if you think about what motivated those people. What was Muhammad's war machine running on? So he had promised people a lot of things about the afterlife, which, I have a bridge to sell you if that's the case. He made rules about sex and politics and how to govern everything, and then motivated people using the sex that he deprived them from. So he would actually participate in human trafficking, taking slaves from these places that he conquered, selling and trading other slaves that God knows where they came from, not just the ways that Muslims have acquired them, and then giving those slaves, the female ones, to the male soldiers. That was one of the things that they were promised. This is not even like contested. This is not even some kind of conspiracy theory. They were promised war booty in more ways than one. They were promised the spoils of war, the money that they took from these people, the females that they took from these people. You're telling me a highly motivated, sexually repressed, fanatically religious group of men conquered a place far away. That is amazing to you? That makes perfect sense. Without the promises actually being true, without heaven being real, they can still have the motivation without going to heaven. So we can explain this in purely realistic ways, and we have. Like, there's no need to explain it. We've seen other conquests and other religions and other empires expand, and we've never thought that must be God. So how laughable is it that Yasir Qadhi thinks he has a point here? Islam made it so far with war, and that must be God.
They walked through the temples and the palaces of Jerusalem, and they conquered, one generation later, North Africa, all the way to...
You hear that? And they conquered North Africa. They didn't go on some innocent type of missionary mission where they're like, hey, we're here. We hope you like this religion. Here's a book in your language. Please read it. No, they conquered. Let's hear it from Yasir Qadhi himself. What did they do, Yasir? What did the Muslims do in North Africa?
Jerusalem. And they conquered, one generation...
What did they do again? Yasir, I want to hear it again.
Walk through the temples and the palaces of Jerusalem, and they conquered, one generation later, North Africa, all the way to Andalusia. They conquered Carthage. You know what Carthage is? Alexandria, bastions of Western civilization, superpowers unto their own. And within 30 years, Amr ibn al-As, a Sahabi, entered Alexandria. If you understand this, like, there should be no competition. You have the Byzantium Empire on one side, and you have a group of people who are by and large not educated. They don't know military techniques. They don't have training. They don't have weapons. They don't have anything.
If you know anything about history, you would know that that happens so often. Like, it's not rare. It's not some kind of miracle that an army would be highly prepared, highly trained, more soldiers, and they lose. And at the end of the day, isn't it just ego-driven men on both sides? Like, you have the army leader here, the army leaders here, and people make mistakes. An army general can lose a battle even though he has the upper hand. That happens. That doesn't mean anything. Even when you look at, for example, the stronghold that the U.S. has had, and not to get political and stuff, but it is true. The U.S. has had a lot of influence in the world in the past decades, a lot of influence. And now it almost seems like it was infiltrated and deeply destroyed by foreign agents. That happens. Is that miraculous? Does that mean that Russia is on God's side or God's helping Russia or something? No, there are human explanations by how these powers get compromised. There are human explanations as to why people have lost a war. So he says conquest, being successful, means that God is real and this is our God. What about when that doesn't happen? Shouldn't the plight of the Palestinian people be evidence that God is nowhere to be found? You can't have it both ways. You can't say when Muslims win, that's because God. When Muslims lose, when Muslims are massacred, well, it's not God's fault.
Of what the superpowers have. And yet, one success after another. Not only that, it's not just a temporary success. No, wherever Islam went, historically, it remained, except brutal cutting off from the roots, small pockets that happen. Not only Andalusia, small other pockets as well. What other? Malta is another example, small little island, okay? And you have...
So you're telling me when a people are brutally cut off from their roots and forced to convert or heavily compelled to convert under threat, that works? Even against Islam? Shouldn't, like, where's the logic there? If Islam was actually true, wouldn't God have protected? I mean, I don't think that's actually a good argument, but following his logic, not even severing the roots of Islamic culture and Islamic religion should succeed. And yet it has, because it's yet just another man-made religion.
Portions of Greece as well, portions of like Cyprus, I should say, not Greece, portions of Cyprus and other places, small pockets here and there, where militarily Muslims were killed or banned or whatever. Otherwise, this is a historical truth. That is one of the facts we will bring up. Number 3, theological coherence within the faith. Islam is true because it is the only faith that theologically has points that are internally consistent and amenable to the pure soul, concept of God.
We talked about this in the last live stream. A pure soul is his way of setting up, if you don't agree with this, if you think Islam has inconsistencies, then your soul is impure. Poisoning the well ad hominem, putting the onus on you to be the bad person if you don't agree with his pathetically weak points. And he made such pathetic points yesterday as God would show you a miracle, but then he'd be forced to destroy you, and God is too merciful to do that. Absolutely, utterly pathetic points. And that's not just him making them, that's in the Quran. So God himself has very pathetic points. And what did he say here? Let's hear it one more time.
Consistent and amenable to the pure.
Right, consistent and theologically consistent. Theology is a very, very complicated and massive topic, and people will debate it both ways and never arrive at a conclusion, much like philosophy in many ways. So while Muslims see Christianity's Holy Trinity as theologically inconsistent, and they say, how can God have a son? That's not an argument really, but how can... it seems silly that God would impregnate a human woman with himself. That's not really an argument that sways Christians, because then they have their own arguments. So a Muslim can rule that Christianity is theologically inconsistent. Much the same way, non-Muslims and Christians and everybody else can rule that Islam is theologically inconsistent. And I've made that case so many times in so many of my videos. For example, the video that I made about heaven and the layers of heaven, you should check that video out. Inconsistent theology, terrible theology. If you look at all the steps in the afterlife of people getting judged or being tortured in the grave and then judged and all that, inconsistent theology. The steps do not make sense, and it would involve severe levels of mental gymnastics and brainwashing. Not brainwashing the audience. I mean, for example, according to Islamic lore, if you would get tortured in the grave if you're a really bad person, but then you show up on the day of judgment and your mind is wiped and you're like, what am I doing here? I wonder what my judgment will be. But if you're already tortured for a long time, wouldn't you already know that you're going to hell, for example? Things like that. So many theological inconsistencies. The problem of evil. He says monotheism, he will say that in a bit, is the most, sensible thing. But yet, the problem of evil will be better explained with polytheism, when you have opposing forces and a fight and a balance and so on. Putting all the onus on God, who created the devil and let him roam free and did all of this on a bet, that's theologically inconsistent. There's so much theological inconsistency, and yet he dares to say, compared to every other religion, none is as theologically consistent as Islam. That is absolutely false. And again, I remind you, don't compare to other religions. Compare to itself, compare to logic, compare the argument, assess the argument on its own. Don't just say, well, Christianity is less theologically consistent, therefore Islam. Let's keep listening.
Soul, concept of God, concept of prophet, concept of monotheism, the fundamentals of faith, resurrection, heaven and hell, judgment, the simplicity.
All of that, every single one of those has issues. Every single one of those has issues. And he dares to say theologically consistent. For example, how does God increase the suffering? Like, how does he have layers of hell if each one of them is unimaginably painful? And if you are non-Muslim, you would be there forever. Is there really a difference between what, the worst terrible mass murderers in the world will experience and someone who just wasn't convinced of this drivel? How is that theologically consistent? It doesn't make any sense. How is it that, a mass murderer and his victims, if they're both non-Muslim and kuffar, are going to hell? How is that theologically consistent? Every word he says is a lie.
Of the theology, and the fact that it does appeal to people of all backgrounds, and the fact that the notion of monotheism truly is something that is a priori ingrained within us. A priori means you don't.
He keeps saying the word fact. I don't think he knows what that means. So one more note about the consistency and inconsistency. The bare minimum for a religion from God is to be consistent. Yet, if it is consistent, that's not proof that it is from God. If I come up with a theology system that is consistent, that doesn't mean it's from God. But if I come up with a theology system that is inconsistent, that sows doubt and my claim holds less water, even though I would need other proof. So it being consistent on its own, which Islam does not achieve, is not proof. It's the bare minimum. Perfection, as Islam claims of itself and of God, is not proof, but it's the bare minimum, and yet it fails to meet that. What's the last thing he said again?
Monotheism truly is something that is a priori ingrained within us. A priori means you don't need evidence, you don't need to study. It's something ingrained within us. This is a proof for the truth of Islam.
So, monotheism being ingrained in us, first of all, that is not true. What does that say about historically polytheism was around for way longer than monotheism? Does that mean that those people did not have monotheism ingrained in them? That is not true. That is absolutely not true. Even if it were true, if the idea of one God, one big sky father appeals to us innately, that still does not prove that Islam is true. I know I'm being repetitive here, but literally everything he says is false. It's so false. And then he says Islam appeals to people of all backgrounds. That's yet another thing like the consistency where if there was actually this plot of God revealing a religion and his hands are tied, he has to reveal it through a prophet somehow. It must be for all people so that all people have an equal chance of following it, an equal chance of being saved. That's not the reality of what's happening, right? But instead of arguing should it, should not be, it being appealing to people from all backgrounds is not proof that it's true. It's the bare minimum. And yet Islam fails to achieve that. For example, someone speaking Arabic has a much greater advantage because they keep dazzling them with the whole the lyrical miracle, the linguistic miracle of Islam and so on. Non-Arabic speakers have to take it on the word of have to have faith in someone like him to say, I know Arabic and it's miraculous. If the Arabic was actually miraculous, isn't that a barrier right there? Or the fact that people born in a certain religion or lack of religion will be predisposed to remain in that group, just like Muslims are predisposed to remain in that group. Doesn't that mean that it is not for all people or not appealing equally to all people? So everything he says is false. Continue, Yasir.
So, number 3, theological maxims and the Aqidah of Islam. Number 4.
So that was his number 3. I don't know if you have any critique of what I said, please do leave it in the live chat and the comments. Minimalist says, how is this the first time I've heard lyrical miracle? I'm pretty sure I've heard that in a joke rap before. I'm a lyrical miracle individual, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, yeah, but again, to emphasize the point that I was making, Elpin, Kansas. I can't read. This person says, someone who's been indoctrinated into another religion are less likely to follow a religion but their own. Surely an all-knowing God would know that. Instead of the guessing game, why doesn't God actually prove himself?
Morality.
Oh, number 4, to prove Islam, morality. Let's hear him out.
Morality of Islam. What does Islam teach in terms of akhlaq? And of course, this is where we're going to come back to the awkwardness. Sometimes Islam's morality appears to clash with some notions of modern political correctness. That will be one of our topics.
Ya salam, Sheikh. Ya
Nonetheless,
salam.
the claim still.
Oh my God, the spin on that. The spin on that. So he says morality is proof of Islam, or Islam's morality, or the morality that Islam dictates, is proof of Islam. 2 things to say here. First of all, before delving into is the morality in Islam good or bad, pause. If a guidebook or a religious book or whatever it might be lists, a bunch of moral rules, and they all happen to be good stuff, okay? Good stuff. What does that mean? Does that mean that that book is from God? No, it doesn't, but it's the bare minimum again. So in keeping up with this theme, what does Islam say about morality? Excuse me, my throat is dry. He says something that I want you to listen to very, very, very carefully. The way that he phrases every word.
Teach in terms of akhlaq. And of course, this is where we're going to come back to the awkwardness. Sometimes Islam's morality appears to clash with some notions of modern political correctness. That will.
The awkwardness, as he puts it. Sometimes Islam's morality appears to clash with the notion of political correctness. So much fluff instead of saying, sometimes Islam says bad shit. Let's rephrase it. Yasir, why are you beating around the bush? He says, appears to clash with notions of political correctness. Let's give an example. When people say, I can't possibly believe that Islam is from God. God didn't say that slavery was awful. Instead, he made rules for human trafficking. I can't believe that that is good. Is that is that political correctness? Is it politically correct to say that slavery was bad? Instead, he phrases it as appears to clash with notions of political correctness instead of saying Islam dictates immoral shit. Let's say it how it is.
Be one of our topics. Nonetheless, the claim still can be made, and we're going to.
The claim still can be made. And I agree with you. You can make all the claims you want. I can claim to be God. Anyone can make the claim.
Prove this point when we get there, that Islam does have a perfect set of morality.
Now, get out of here. Here's a great example. Baked Beans says, is it politically correct to say maybe don't beat your wife? Excuse me, I need to cough again. I am sick and tired in more ways than one. Is it politically correct to say maybe don't beat your wife? I wouldn't say so. I would say it's just morally correct. Yet in Islam, Surah 4, Surah An-Nisa, verse 34 says, if you fear your wife's disobedience, a bunch of steps, advise her. Why does she have to obey you? Like patriarchy. Advise her, separate in beds, and beat her. That's perfect morality, or is that, clashing with notions of political correctness?
Number 5, conforming with known facts. The fact that Islam does not contradict known facts.
I want to laugh, but I don't have it in me. Islam does not contradict known fact. Forget everything we just said about slavery and domestic violence. Islam does contradict known facts about those. But what do you mean by it doesn't contradict known facts? Give us an example, Sheikh.
It does not contradict science. Now, once again,
sorry.
That is very positive, except for 1 or 2 areas where we have to discuss. Most obviously,
Islam does not contradict science. Once again, that is very positive, except in 1 or 2 areas in which we have to discuss further. Pay attention to every single word. Why is he talking like a freaking politician? This is positive? Islam, he means to say it doesn't clash with science, except in 1 or 2 areas in which we need to discuss more. Except in 1 or 2 areas where it does, is what he actually should be saying. And we need to discuss more, as in, I want to dazzle you with big words till you forget about it. What are you talking about? Let's hear it again.
Very positive, except for one or two areas where we have to discuss. Most obviously, the theory of evolution, which is one of our biggest issues, which we will discuss about that, right?
He does very great at saying we will discuss it in the future, and maybe he does. I don't know. I'm not familiar with his entire library, because this was 50 minutes of video to say nothing. So do I want to put myself through a video where he tries to discuss, so to speak, or explain away how Islam doesn't clash with evolution? Maybe. I don't know. I don't get paid enough for that. But if you guys really want me to, leave a suggestion in the comments. Alpine, I can't read the name. Alpine says, isn't there a thing about mountains in the Quran? Yes. It says, I believe it says something along the lines of, وَجَعَلْنَا الْجِبَالَ أَوْتَادًا, and we, God says, and we made the mountains as pegs. And then Muslims go to explain how this is a scientific miracle because they hold the ground from shaking and prevent earthquakes. Bullshit. Scientific bullshit. Great. Like, you would get an F if you ever wrote a report, a paper on that topic in that way. Mountains are not pegs. They don't stabilize the earth to prevent earthquakes. They actually result from the movements of the tectonic plates. So yeah, clearly contradicted reality and science. Let's keep listening.
So, number 5, the fact that when the Quran came down, what people knew of knowledge, of facts, of science, even of history, the Quran does not reflect those mistakes. The Quran,
and yet it does. So again, I have to do this song and dance where I could argue, and I will, that his claim is wrong. The Quran does make the same mistakes as the people before, which is, indicative of Muhammad getting knowledge from people around him. But also, if it didn't, that still doesn't make it a book from God. Excellent example, baked beans, embryology. The Quran essentially copied, or even if you want to say it was inspired with information independently, but information about embryology that Galen had said in Greek, I'm sorry, in Greek scientific discoveries, Galen had also argued that that human conception, or in embryology, a baby is created not just from the fluid of a man, but also of a woman, right? And how did he figure that out? Well, obviously, because the kid has traits from both. If it was just from one guy, then the kid would have just the traits of the man. So yeah, they didn't have microscopes back then, but they had brains. But the way that these sheikhs present things make it seem like people were drooling dumbasses who couldn't figure out the most basic facts of life. And this, we're talking about Greek scientific discoveries over 1,000 years before Islam. Muslims would argue that how could Muhammad have known this, even if the Greeks have said the same thing, which, by the way, the stages of embryology that the Greeks have proposed are the same ones in the Quran, which are incorrect. There's a verse in the Quran that says, فَكَسَوْنَا الْعِظَامَ لَحْمًا, as if God creates, a baby starts as bone and then it's covered in flesh. That's not what happens. You don't start as a little tiny skeleton that gets covered in flesh. That's not what happens whatsoever. So yes, to tell Yasir, the mistakes have been copied into the Quran, but even if they weren't, that's still not proof. If the Quran didn't make the same mistakes as people before, it's not proof that the Quran is from God. Each criteria is disprovable in the claim that he's making and as a criteria of divinity on its own.
transcends those mistakes. And the language of the Quran truly is conforming with historical facts, conforming with knowledge as it exists.
What does that mean? The language of the Quran, that's actually also incorrect. And yet again, if it was conforming with the knowledge that exists, does that mean that it's from God? All the science books that are written right now, well, I guess some could be proven wrong after a bit. There are a lot of books that are written that conform with the reality that they're in. Does that mean they're from God? And yet there's a verse about how God holds up the sky with invisible pillars. Insanity. And it has nothing to do with the reality of what a sky is or how it stays up there. There is no physical, solid object that is a sky. The way that Islam describes the shooting stars as missiles, like meteors and comets, the missiles that God sends against the jinn who are eavesdropping on the revelation and communication. Insanity. That's not actually what happens at all. We can actually predict these so-called missiles. Well, not me, but scientists can. And they know that this flash in the sky is because a piece of rock or whatever it might be from space has hit the atmosphere and is usually disintegrates. Sometimes it doesn't and it falls through. But that's because of friction with the air molecules, which don't exist past the atmosphere. I mean, I'm sure you can argue that space is not completely empty, but it's very, very sparsely, filled with matter. But still, the point stands. The description of angels as having wings, that is not consistent with reality, because an angel could use wings maybe inside the Earth's atmosphere. But once you go up to space, do you see rockets flapping their wings? No, because there's nothing to push. Wings work by pushing the air. You can't do that. Or like the pressure difference between up and below, you can't do that when there's no air to push. So again, he's wrong on so many levels.
And that is, by the way, one of the most perplexing questions for modern non-Muslim Western academics of Islam. One of the biggest
Bullshit.
questions: how could an unlettered prophet in the middle of Arabia produce a book that seems to have a level of sophistication that doesn't make sense for a shepherd in Mecca? How could a...
And yet it does. So again, we can find a lot of reasonable explanations. The way that they present Muhammad as like just a little dumb shepherd who wouldn't know how to speak or do anything really because he couldn't read or write. And yet in his time, oral tradition was all the rage. All people did was poetry, and people told stories and poems and so on. Even people who were unlettered even people who were uneducated could be great poets. And we can't even confirm that every single verse in the Quran was written by Muhammad or revealed through Muhammad. We can't confirm any of that. All we know is tales that this guy was illiterate. Even that is not in the Quran. I mean, no, actually it is in the Quran, but that doesn't prove that it's actually real. So as long as there's a human explanation, everything he says, like as long as there's a not supernatural, a natural explanation, everything he's saying is bunk. He's trying to present it as if people are so perplexed, Western academics are so perplexed that they can't find a possible single explanation for how this book exists, except that God sent it through an illiterate man. And I've said this before, but yes, thank you for reminding me. MMO Yap says, they infantilize Muhammad so much, like he's the dumbest person ever, just to make a point. They don't call him dumb, but that's essentially what they're implying. How could a man figure this out without a formal education? Formal education wasn't a thing for most people back then. They still weren't dumb.
Unlettered person, when there was no Old Testament in Arabic, there was no New Testament available in all of Arabia, when Mecca was not a trading post for Jews and Christians, when the Byzantines are not there, how could...
Okay, let's set one thing clear here. As far as I understand, Muhammad's first wife, before he even, got the revelation, so to speak, was a merchant. Khadija was a successful merchant. Whether that means she traveled herself, whether that means she had merchants under her who, gave her the spoils and profit and they traveled, that was a business that she was so successful at. She was his sugar mommy. That is, Muslims say that, right? Like they don't say the sugar mommy part, but they say that she was a successful businesswoman, and they even point to it as proof that Islam is a feminist religion when, all that was pre-Islam even. And yet he says there was no trading. Muhammad was in an isolated little cave and he had no conception of other religions or followers of other religions or other languages. That's false. If he was discussing and arguing and fighting with people there in Mecca and Medina from other religions, they spoke the same language as he did. Maybe Yasir's claim about the Bible not having yet been translated into Arabic, I can't dispute that right now. But let's say that's actually true. The Bible did not exist as a written book in Arabic. Yet, the Quran wasn't even a written book at the time. It was all oral tradition. You're telling me the Arabs in the region, or the people who spoke Arabic in the region, who were Jews and Christian, did not know their scripture whatsoever? Did not utter any word about their scripture? Muhammad never took information from them passively or otherwise? How is that sellable? Like, how do you expect me to believe that? He clearly, there were even times when there are hadiths when Muhammad says, well, the Jews do this, so we're going to do it. You're telling me he was just isolated in a cave and not even speaking or hearing anybody and just wrote a book like he was incommunicative and just wrote a book out of thin air? That's not true.
Could a shepherd be speaking about this entire repertoire of knowledge of not just modernity, not meaning of his time, things happening in other places, غُلِبَتِ الرُّومُ and other places, but also of the past? So
when he says that, you'd think that Muhammad had some kind of like detailed historical documentation of events that no one could have known. And it turns out to be one or two things about, oh, the Rome was defeated. Rome was defeated. Okay. He couldn't have heard through word of mouth that they were defeated in a battle. Like, how infantilizing is this? How could a shepherd know this stuff? Was he an idiot? If that's what you're trying to tell us, Yasir, just say it as it is. How could an idiot know this? But that's not what he's saying. You're trying to sell him as a genius and at the same time as an idiot. The Sineda, thank you so much for the super chat. I really appreciate it. Says, thank you, Aladdin. I missed this so much. I don't know if I'd say I miss this. I miss doing this for you guys, but I don't miss listening to him or such lectures. It is so frustrating. It is so frustrating. He says, how could a shepherd know things ever?
the fact that the Quran, and then obviously the issue of science and the Quran, we'll talk about that as well. As you
The
probably
issue of science in the Quran, we'll talk about that. Let's just don't worry about that right now.
know, I'm a bit skeptical of this whole science in the Quran notion, but one thing can be said, and that is that.
So this is confusing. He says, I am skeptical about the whole science in the Quran notion. I think what he's trying to say here is that he's skeptical of the scientific miracle claims, which some Muslims use to say that the Quran predicted the Big Bang and so on. And yet, just earlier, he said that the Quran does not contradict science, but there are many cases where the Quran attempts to describe the world and fails utterly and contradicts science. So does he believe that there's scientific evidence for the Quran being a book from God, but at the same time, there's no scientific miracles? He's kind of really contradicting himself again.
The Quran does not reflect.
Oh, and Cloudhead says Rome was defeated was a prophecy, Aladdin. Never mind the past tense Arabic shenanigans. I know that, and he actually says it, I believe, in this video as if it's like a historical fact that he knew. But the same thing about predictions. When you set up a vague prediction, Rome will be defeated someday, and they might win again. Like, is that really proof of anything? I did a whole video. Thank you, A. Jensen, for reminding me. I did a whole video on the story of the men sleeping in the cave. So it is lifted from Christian mythology, proof that he had contact with the Christians. In fact, as we know, the reason for revelation of verses about this story was a couple of Jewish men challenging Muhammad to tell them what the story was. Even that is not really proof, because if they know the story, other people know the story, he could know the story, but somehow they set this challenge up for him, and the Quran failed to even meet that challenge, which I wouldn't have set up that way. But the Quran still failed and gave a vague story and then said only God knows some of these things. I made a video about that. It was one of the animated videos. If you haven't seen them yet, please do check it out. I don't remember what it was called. It was a while ago. And thank you, Whoopi Goman, for the super chat.
The knowledge of science of the 7th century. The Quran uses language that is far more compatible with facts of science than with understandings of science in the 7th century.
Need I say anything?
So that's number what? Number 5. Number 6, experiential evidence. And of course, this is subjective. As I said, every set of evidences, if you were highly skeptical, you could poke holes in the argument. So I'm admitting this from day one. And I want...
You're not admitting anything. You're poisoning the well. As he said in the first half of the video, I could bring you any type of evidence, but if you're too skeptical, it's not going to convince you, and that's your fault. So what he means by experiential evidence,
want you to understand this is my point. If you disagree, good, let's have a conversation. But the way I'm phrasing this is that you have to have faith for every one of these points, or else if you
You have to have faith for each of his first 5 proofs. How does this work exactly? So you approach him, hey, prove Islam to me. He says, here are 5 proofs so far, 10 even by the end of this video. But to believe them or to find them necessary, like to find them sufficient, you have to have faith. Ya akhi, how am I going to have faith if you haven't actually brought me to the faith? He says we have more than enough evidence, and if you deny it, that's because you're a hater and there's nothing that will convince you. And in the same breath, you need faith for those 5 evidences. What are you talking about? So it was faith the whole time. There was no evidence. Stop bullshitting us.
are coming with a high level of skepticism, you will be able to poke holes in every one of them, but then you will remain.
If you're not an idiot, if you're actually consistent about your skepticism, you'll be able to poke holes in every single one of these. And I'm sorry, I don't mean to say that if you watch this as a believer and you didn't notice these things that you are, but being a believer and being in this ecosystem of belief, it lowers your guard, I guess, or lowers your guard. You're not trained to be skeptical. You are actually demonized for having skepticism as he does. So I don't blame you for falling for this. But if you're sitting and thinking about it with a clear mind, without the influence that Islam already has on you, if you're an independent, non-Muslim listening to this stuff, it doesn't take much for you to poke holes. It doesn't take arrogance. It doesn't take stubbornness. It just takes a clear mind and listening to the words that he says.
Without an alternative. There is no other alternative. And that level of skepticism only stems from arrogance.
There we go.
I repeat, if you are that skeptical of every single genre of evidences, the only explanation is you are actually arrogant and you're not really interested in the truth. Okay.
He seems to have a very difficult job, Yasir Qadhi. A very, very difficult time in eliminating possibilities. So for him, he quickly jumps to the only explanation is this one that I already liked. The only explanation for someone not being convinced by your drivel is that they're arrogant. That's the only explanation. So take it, pause. Pause. Think about all the other possible explanations, including biases, including everything, including reason. These are all possible explanations that someone just they found you insufferable. That's a possible explanation for why they're not convinced. They found your talking points vague, vacant, empty. That's another possible explanation. Pinning it on arrogance, who's the arrogant person here?
Okay, so experiential evidence, a person's own experience.
There we go.
Experiential evidence. The way you guys feel on the 27th of Ramadan when you're in sajda, that is experiential. It gives you a soothing, comforting balm. This is the truth.
Okay, so a lot of the time, this would be the same kind of person who says something to the effect of, facts don't care about your feelings. So ex-Muslims often get demonized and ridiculed and told that, or talked about in the sense that most of their arguments are emotional. They're not actually factual. They're just upset. They find something yucky about Islam, and that's why they don't believe, or they claim to not believe. That's the claim that they make about people like me. And yet he just throws emotion into it. And yet he has he's promoting a religion that heavily relies on emotional manipulation. Everything he's been doing so far includes emotional manipulation. And he says, the way you feel proves that Islam is true. So if I feel similar feelings or better feelings doing yoga or following some other spiritual path or following another religion or doing a certain drug and thinking that I spoke to God, are my feelings, there are 2 questions. Are my feelings valid? Yes. The way you feel is valid. As a Muslim, if you feel this wave of comfort washing through you, are you actually feeling that? Yes, you are. Does that mean that God is doing that to you? Absolutely not. And you can't have it both ways. You can't say if you feel repulsed by Islam, if you feel an anxiety, a lack of ease, if you feel terrorized by God's threats all the time, that is not proof that Islam is not true. And yet, if you feel good, that's proof that Islam is true. It is laughable that he truly just said, you feel good, therefore Islam is true. You can feel good at a concert, you can feel good in church. It doesn't mean either of those things are true in the sense that God said them or divine.
Experiential. You know it to be true because you feel that validation, the inner peace that comes with Islam. And call it mystical. It doesn't matter. The words are irrelevant.
The words are very relevant. Pause to read this comment. Awais97 says, the moment Muslims accept that rational disbelief exists, some of them will question the fairness of an eternal hell. Thank you for summing it up perfectly. I am in this camp. Am in this camp. One of the first things that really got me to pause and think was, I can see how someone doesn't find this convincing. I can see how irrational and far-fetched this sounds. I can see how this sounds like if a Christian was saying it, I wouldn't give it a second thought. I can see that. How then is hell fair, or God's judgment system fair? Thank you. That's exactly what I'm trying to do. Part of what I'm trying to do here is communicate to believers and others that skepticism is valid, that it is rational. You can rationally not believe in Islam. And you can find ways to rationalize believing in Islam too. But if you just accept that someone can honestly, without arrogance, without all the kibr, all the hate, all the stuff that they accuse us of, if someone can rationally, honestly not believe in Islam, God is a terrible monster for creating them that way and then torturing them forever. So back to Yasir Qadhi's experience.
The spiritual epiphanies, every once in a while we get them. Especially when we're going through our own crises, we turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and we find a sense of meaning and comfort. And we know this is not fake. It's real.
That's why I said your feelings are real. He said, it's not fake, it's real. These aren't the two alternatives here. Because I agree with him. This feeling of peace that a person might feel is real. So is a feeling of anxiety that another person might feel. That's also real. But what he means to say is not fake and real. What he's actually saying is fake as in not from God and real as in from God, or indicative of the truth of Islam. That's the wrong categorization altogether. Yes, the feelings are real. No, they're not indicative of the truth of Islam. People say that about so many other experiences, so many other religions, so many other philosophies, and yet, yes, it would not give it the second thought of thinking, is Islam false because this other person had an epiphany while doing yoga?
Answering of du'as. How many amongst us, we were in situations where there is no way out, and we're making du'a to Allah, and a mini miracle happens in our lives. And I can
Okay, again with the miracle stuff. What is a miracle and what is a mini miracle? So the way that he's explaining it, right? Dua means prayer and not the mandated prayer, as in like praying as in asking God for something or asking God for help or support or whatever. He says, how many of us have prayed for support and then we experience a mini miracle? And what I assume he means by a mini miracle is that something that actually helps you out, but is not actually a miracle. It's just that the timing is very convenient for you. For example, I can't pay rent this month. I don't know what I'm going to do. My car payments are too high. And then I get in a no-fault accident and the insurance company gives me a big fat check. And I've been praying to God for help. That's a mini miracle from his perspective, right? But yet, if you hadn't prayed, that could have happened anyway, and you wouldn't have given God credit. Looking at things like prayer is such a slippery concept, where if God helps you, credit to God. Is, not God helps you. If something good happens to you, credit to God because you interpret it as God helps you. If the good thing doesn't happen, then God must be holding out for something else for you, or he's testing you, or he'll give you more in the afterlife. It's a cop-out. There is no way where you can test this hypothesis and it fails. Similarly, if a Christian were to say, I prayed to God and conveniently, I got money in the right time, I got help in the right time, I got cured of cancer, does that mean that Christianity is true? He would say, no. Either that the real God helped you out just to hope to give you more time to convert to Islam, for example, or that it actually was a coincidence, has nothing to do with God. he would find rational explanations that don't involve supernatural. Yet, when it has anything to do with Islam, let's look at everything good that happens as God's credit and everything bad that happens as not God's fault. It is arrogant, Yasir. He keeps calling people arrogant, yet it is arrogant to think that God helping you out with your many miracles and your little problems, no matter how big they are, is real. And yet God being silent on people dying in a war zone is also good somehow. We're also the same God. How do I say this? If that God is real, right, that sits out there and helps you out with your little money problems or whatever, and yet doesn't save the person who's being pelted with rockets at no fault of their own, screw that God. That God does not deserve a minute of our time. Yet that's the God that you worship. How arrogant to think that your wishes are more important, that God is fulfilling these little mini miracles for you, and yet quiet on the death and the suffering. How arrogant.
Tell you from my own life perspective, multiple times that has happened without a doubt. Many answers of du'as have taken place that logistics would never have allowed for. This is an experiential evidence. Frankly, the stories you all want to hear about, jinn stories. I'm not going to go there, don't worry.
Why don't you go there, Sheikh? Why don't you go there? So for those of you who don't know, I mean, I'm sure you've heard of genies from Aladdin. Jinn are this mythical creature that people believed in since before Islam, and that's why it was easy for Islam to build on that mythology. But there are these, I guess you would call them supernatural beings. In Islam, they're like it's like a parallel world that we can't see, but they can see us. And we can sometimes interact with them through black magic and stuff, which is not advisable, but they can also be Muslim and kafir and so on. There's this whole crazy mythology. He says, I'm not going to get into that, but I'd like you to. I'd like you, Mr. Educated Man, to lay out the insanity of what you believe in. And I'm sorry, no offense to people who believe in jinn out there. I'm not. I don't, and I don't look very kindly on that belief. I think it's a very harmful belief that can extend psychosis and paranoia and mental health issues, and it's offloading reality onto mythology. He says, I'm not going to get into it. I'd like you to get into it. The fact that it's embarrassing for you to sit there and say, I believe in these invisible creatures, I know you know it's embarrassing. I want you to sit in a room with non-Muslims and tell them how loony your beliefs are. Tell us about jinn, Sheikh. Tell us about jinn. What have you experienced with jinn?
But it is an experiential evidence. The very fact that these stories are real and that
his use of words, pause. Thank you for the super chat. Death Eater 007 says, my ex-Muslim comfort YouTuber is back. Thank you, Aladdin. Thanks for the super chat and thanks for being here. Also, Kobarto, thanks for the super chat. He says, the fact that these stories are real. He uses words as if they don't mean anything. The fact that these stories are real. Says who? And if you do believe in the supernatural, does Yasir then believe that every supernatural story told by someone who believes in another religion or a polytheistic religion or some other mystical, discipline or none at all, does he believe those stories just as much as he believes jinn? Or does he only believe it when it appeals to his mythology? Are those just as valid? If someone supposedly saw a jinn that told them about Jesus and about how they're, the enemy of Jesus and only Jesus can save you from me, does that mean that Jesus is real as a God, not just as a prophet? He wouldn't think so. So why are you taking anecdotal bullshit stories as fact are real? What do you mean the fact that these stories are real? What are you talking about? And I've said this before. I've experienced, not jinn encounters, a family member who was having mental health issues who others in the family interpreted as possibly jinn possession. They sought medical help for him, thankfully, but also jinn stuff. They started doing ruqya. They started exacerbating the symptoms and getting ideas in their head about how this might be a jinn. Bullshit. I wish that never happened. And this idiot is giving credibility to this bullshit. Real, the fact that these stories are real, he says.
our tradition explains them. These stories are real, and that our tradition explains them.
How does your tradition explain them? Your tradition mentions them. It explains some bullshit about how, black magic is real and stuff like that, and God pelting them with missiles. That doesn't mean it explains them. I don't think he understands English. Maybe it's not his first language. I think it is, but it sounds like he doesn't know what words mean. What does our tradition explains jinn mean to you, Yasir Qadhi? Because I can amend that to our tradition talks bullshit about the existence of jinn. It doesn't actually explain them or prove them.
The fact that the Quran and Sunnah quite accurately describes and categorizes and explains supernatural phenomenon.
What do words mean at this point? The Quran and the stories of the Prophet quite accurately describes supernatural events. When the hell has that happened? When have you seen a supernatural event or supernatural phenomena, and then the Quran described it and you're like, yeah, that makes sense? When? All we have are stories. Bring us proof. Show us jinn. Do something. It's insane. It's insane that he's just saying words as if they're true.
Interacting with this species, those of you that have done it, actually prove.
Interacting with this species, for those of you who have done it, for those of you who have interacted with the species called Muslim Da'wah men, I do not envy you, and I am one of those people. Stop giving credibility to insanity.
Proves the truth of Islam. Because how else do you explain it? This is an experiential evidence for the truth.
How else do you explain people interacting with what they think are jinn? Again, I flip the question on its head for him. How else do you explain voodoo? How else do you explain other traditions that are and magic and all the other stuff that claims to also do this with a completely different explanation and different like ailments and different solutions and all that stuff, which I also think is bullshit? Would he then say that that is proof of African mythology and African polytheistic ideas? He keeps saying experiential evidence. So essentially my feelings, I feel that a jinn spoke to me and I feel that Allah spoke to me, therefore it's real. Your feelings are not valid. Give us facts. You can't call us arrogant and also talk about your feelings as if those are the basis of facts. The fact that Yasir Qadhi is yapping is pissing me off. Keep talking, man.
The claim of Islam. So all of this is under experiential. Number 7.
We're up to 7.
And we're going to spend quite a while on this point. Number 7.
Go ahead.
By the way, this isn't in order. I can change the order later. I'm just giving you some examples. Number 7. The fact that Islam externally resonates with our soul internally. And there is a level of congruence, a level of perfection, an overlap that is inexplicable unless the both are from the same source. Allah created our soul, Allah revealed the Quran, it fits perfectly together.
Again, claims, it's not even masquerading as facts. He just says they are. I made a whole video about several videos actually, about ways that Islam has hurt my mental health. I don't believe in such a thing as a soul. I don't think that there's a disconnect between, your brain chemistry, the neurons, the electrical signals that go throughout your body, and your personality, your essence. There is no such thing as a soul, like ectoplasm, like another thing. There is no such thing. You are what your brain is. And the evidence for that, for me, is that having a brain injury or changing your diet or changing your brain chemistry will change your behavior and your thoughts. So there is no independent soul that is unrelated to your biology. We are the brain. But what he's saying here is that Islam meshes very well with your psyche, with your soul, with your mental health, with your brain. That is not true. For a lot of people, it doesn't. And it definitely, even Muslims say Islam is difficult. It's simultaneously, it's like Islam is easy, but also Muslims tell themselves and each other, Islam is difficult, but it's a test. Conveniently, whichever narrative they want based on what they're saying. So if Islam is really meshes well with a human's soul and psyche, how come it caused so much mental health problems for me and so many other people? If you can take it as like it meshes well with you means that it's true, then just as valid that it doesn't mesh with me, therefore it's false. I didn't even make that claim though. I would be skewered by believers if I just said, Islam hurt my feelings, it hurt my brain, therefore it is false. I never even said that. But I was listing all the ways that Islamic teaching, Islamic practice, the society around me has hurt my mental health. Not as proof that Islam is false, but as a cautionary tale and as, I suppose, reaching out to people, telling them that you're not alone, because I'm not the only one who's been through these. So the existence of people where Islam did not mesh well with them, is that evidence that it is false? If we're going by Yasir Qadhi's so-called logic, then yes. Then I don't need to do anything else. I've already disproven him. But you meshing well with a certain philosophy or a certain way of thought does not mean that God sent it. If anything, if you study just the most basic psychology, let alone have a degree in psychology or multiple degrees in psychology, you would quickly realize that Islam does not, and by extension Allah, does not understand the human psyche whatsoever. That the simplistic, stupid breakdown of a pure, like things into a pure soul and a devil that's trying to corrupt that pure soul does not understand the human psyche, does not include the nuances of so many things, including, for example, psychopathy. Where does that fit in? Is that a person without a soul, or is that a person with a devil that has already gotten in them? Like, it does not explain any of that stuff well. And in trying to brute force that onto people, everybody, to brute force this religion on everybody equally, it does not accommodate for so many nuances. So no, it does not mesh well. And even if it did, that's not proof of anything. But it doesn't. And when he talks about like ideas spreading very quickly, he says religions, Islam is the only religion that has spread so quickly and like it ingrains itself. Capitalism is not quite a religion. I mean, at least not in the sense of belief in God and so on, but it includes belief in the value of money, for example, in the stability of the economy, in, reciprocal value and so on. That has spread way faster and is way more ingrained in the world, for better or for worse, many argue for worse, including me, than Islam. Does that mean that capitalism is a godly idea? No. How infectious, how widespread an idea is, how well it meshes with people, or how poorly it does, says nothing about whether or not it is divine.
And of course, that's the notion of the fitrah. That's number 7, right? Number 8, the universality of Islam. We would argue, and Christians would agree, no other faith tradition, we would argue a faith must be universal. God would not discriminate based upon who you are. All human beings should have the same faith. And there are only 2 faiths that are universal by their actual nature: proselytizing and universal.
So I agree with the spirit of this in the sense that if this paradigm is actually true, right? God created everybody and he has this little contrived way of sending a message and he wants people to follow it instead of proving himself and all that kind of stuff. It has to be universally accessible and universally provable, and not, for example, be that if you're someone from a certain part of the world, it's near impossible for you to join the religion. And yet, this is actually the reality of it. Yes, Islam is welcoming to everybody. Islam says if you're a man or a woman, well, I guess not everybody. If you're just a cisgendered or binary, either a man or a woman, you are welcome to join Islam. Doesn't matter your color of skin and so on. There was racism in the history of Islam, but as a Muslim today, there's still also racism, but the book says it doesn't matter your color of skin. Sure, but that's the bare minimum. Islam doesn't even meet that because it's not as equally accessible, first of all. Other religions got there first, which makes it harder for people to believe in Islam. And even people who try, like myself, even people who are born into it, it's easy to leave. It's easy to not believe anymore because your arguments are trash. So is it accessible? Is it equally accessible to everybody? No, it isn't. But to give Islam credit for not being exclusive and be like, that proves that it's from God, no, that's the bare minimum. The bare minimum is that it shouldn't be exclusive to people if God decided that he will torture those who don't join it.
And that is Islam and Christianity. So we say universality is a sign of the truth of Islam. Number 9, the transformative capacity of the faith, i.e., as Jesus is alleged to have said, by their fruits ye shall know them. Look at what happens when a person converts. Look at pre-conversion versus post-conversion.
I have. So a lot of times you hear stories of converts in terrible situations. And that happens in a lot of religions and cults. They recruit people, either they intentionally recruit people who are very vulnerable, or people who are in vulnerable situations tend to be looking for a greater meaning, for hope, for community, for resources. And often that happens to be the local church, the mosque, their Muslim friends. That happens. I have spoken to countless ex-converts, though. It's a recurring theme. You get a lot of burst of energy from joining this new group. You get a lot of recognition, a lot of love bombing. You get a lot of maybe even actual improvements in your social life, in your career, in your academic life, all that stuff. That does happen. But then usually there's a downward trajectory when they get to actually know the religion. They're like, wait a second, I signed up for this? All of this? They told me it was easy. They told me this made sense, but this isn't easy and it doesn't make sense. And yet those stories are discounted or not even told by Muslims. They celebrate, they highlight the new converts, especially the lighter skinned ones. They're like, hey, look at this, we caught this one. If this person can convert, then so can every other American. That's the sort of the feeling that they get, that yes, it is universal. But talk about all the failures. Not failures as in people who failed, but people who couldn't follow the religion anymore because, sure, they were celebrated for a minute, and then they realize it's not true, and then they're not recognized. And as somebody here said, what about Andrew Tate? Andrew Tate, sure, he's a grifter, but that's somebody who, honestly, like he wasn't, like Muhammad has done a lot of things that Andrew Tate has done. Now we think of Andrew Tate as a criminal, but not Muhammad. What does that say? Sky Lurk says, I felt that way when I converted. And there are converts, it happens so many times, converts who go out to do terrorist events, to commit acts of terrorism, who do terrible things. That is a fruit as well. I'm not saying that's representative of all Muslims, but if you just discount every bad person as not representative of Islam or converting to Islam, and every good person as representative, then you're just selecting good people to highlight, to give credit to Islam. That's not how you assess anything. Do you have a study, a data-driven study on people's lives and what they've done after converting, and how many people have left, how many stayed, how many lives got worse, better, all the converts who got married to Muslim men and then their life got exponentially worse? Do you have data on that? I mean, mine is anecdotal. I've spoken to so many of them. It's still not, cumulative data, but I've spoken to so many, unfortunately, nightmare stories. People who have been through hell and back because they converted. Don't tell me then the fruits, you know them by their fruits. There are very, not just bad fruits, but people who have been through so many bad experiences, and you're going to discount those as proof against Islam. So how does that work? No true Scotsman fallacy whenever someone doesn't have a good experience with Islam, or they leave, or they do something terrible. And whenever someone is just slightly Muslim, they celebrate them. Someone won a prize somewhere, for scientific discovery. Do they have a Muslim name? MashaAllah, it's one of us. It's one of us. Look at how great Islam is. Do they have an LGBT plus pro opinion? They're not one of us. Get out of here.
Look at a good Muslim, not a bad Muslim, not an evil Muslim, a good Muslim, and how they interact. And
see, what does that mean? Not a bad Muslim, not a good Muslim. Look at a good atheist. There are a lot of philanthropists. There are a lot of people who are good people in general. They don't have to be rich and giving money. There are a lot of people out there who are irreligious or atheists. Look at those good people. Don't look at the bad atheists. And that's how you judge atheism by. That's not the case I'm making, of course. I don't think that atheism reliably leads you to act one way or another. It's just a stance on one of many different points, one of many different, I don't know, contentious things, which is the existence of God. But if you're going to judge Muslims by just the good Muslims, whatever that means, let's take Muhammad. He was a good Muslim, right? If every Muslim today was like Muhammad, the world would be a much worse place. I am thankful that Muslims are better than Muhammad. Most of them, I would argue, are better than Muhammad. Most Muslims today do not own slaves and would not want to, most. That's better than Muhammad. So if you take the ultimate example of a Muslim, it's a terrible person, at least compared to the best that we can think of today.
Deal with the world. So Islam has a transformative capacity like no other faith tradition. And number 10, last and definitely least, this is not a strong argument, but it is an argument. And
if it's not a strong argument, why are you bringing it up? Like, don't waste my time. Like, none of this was strong arguments. But if you know this is going to be a terrible argument, why are you wasting our time?
I have met converts, multiple converts, that have crossed all of these or haven't even traversed them, and they had to start traversing them because of number 10. Last and most definitely least, by process of elimination. I.e., look at everything else, clearly not right, not right, not right, not right, not right, not right. What's left on the list? When there's everything crossed out and only Islam is left.
If I give you a list of 10 MLMs, which are multi-level marketing schemes, these are scams. Please never join one. If you did join one, I'm sorry that you've been through that experience. But it's essentially like a pyramid scheme. You have to keep paying up, and like only the people on top make money. If I give you 10 such pyramid schemes, and they're different in the product that they're selling, they're different in their alleged message and philosophy and whatnot, and then I tell you to compare them, would you then say that the best company to invest in or the best use of your money is one of these 10 pyramid schemes? By process of elimination, arrive at one of them. No, there's also the option of keeping your money in the bank without any interest, which is not the best thing, but that would be better than investing in a pyramid scheme. So don't give me a process of elimination when A, you did not go through every single religion out there. I'm pretty sure most people, when they're assessing, what religion should I follow, they look at the big ones. Because if God is truly sending us, a message, and he's going to torture all the ones who don't get it, if it's one of those religions, it's probably going to be one of the bigger ones. At least that's, how most people think. So if you're comparing to other religions, you didn't go through the entire list. And then when you go through the entire list, you eliminate them based on criteria that's not actually criteria, just like the criteria that, Yasir has been setting up as proof. But if you were to go and say, well, a religion that does not have a book, that's disqualified. There you go, disqualified a bunch of religions because you're choosing based on criteria that you already like. But at the end of the day, you're discounting the possibility that there is no religion that is actually a communication from God, which is a separate position than there is no God. There's a possibility that creation was a thing. That's a possibility. I don't even contest that. There could be a or multiple creators or forces or something bigger than us. That's plausible. And it's very likely that it never communicated with us. That's one of the possibilities. How did you eliminate that possibility? Realistically, what Muslims say is, it wouldn't make sense that God would create us and not talk to us. That's not an argument. That's not at all an argument. That's like saying, if I were God, I would talk to people. But then when I say the same thing, I say, if I were God, I wouldn't torture them for infinity because that's petty. And they'd say, well, you're not God. You don't get to decide. So who are you to say that God is not out there and not communicating with us? Says who? So a Muslim like Yasir would eliminate that possibility and say, if God is real, there must be hell and heaven, there must be fairness, there must be communication. But none of that is actually must be. None of that is an ought. So how did you eliminate every single possibility?
Now you are forced to go back and look at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Then you are shown the proof of Islam. And I have multiple convert friends. They told me their stories exactly like this, that they're searching for the truth and they write down the religions they're most interested in. Almost always they begin with Buddhism because that is the politically correct, proper religion to begin with, whatnot. And then the other sects of Christianity, other this and that. And, one of my friends said to me that I didn't even put Islam on the list because I just assumed there is no way that is right. But after looking at all the other major faiths, there was
Wait, I
nothing
can't hear him anymore. Can you guys hear him?
left other
Oh,
than
there we go.
Islam. And the more I read, I couldn't refute anything. This is number 9, congruence. I couldn't.
So his point here, his proof is, I know converts who joined Islam and they thought Islam was better than the other religions, or the other religions were not proven and Islam was. You know a guy who converted to Islam? That's your argument? Really? People convert to Islam, that's your argument? I know a guy who converted to Christianity. Is that an argument for Christianity? This is a great point. The fact that he even said it's not a very strong argument says that he's going for quantity over quality. That's what he does. And not just him. That's what a lot of Muslim preachers do. They give you, here's 20 half-baked, half-assed claims that I will present as proof. And I will make you feel stupid for, and arrogant for pushing back on them, and overwhelm you and say, how could you not believe at this point? Why include this half-assed attempt at a proof? They're all half-assed, but this one especially. I know people who converted and they said they went through the list. What's the point?
Refute anything. It just made sense to me.
Why
until he ends up in number 9, congruence. I couldn't refute anything. It just made sense to me.
I don't know about you guys.
Until he ends up embracing it, right? So this is by process of elimination. If
a
all the rest are wrong, by process of congruence. I couldn't refute anything. It just made sense to me.
Seems like we're having
until
technical difficulties. Allah is watching the stream and he does not like what I'm saying. Let's try it again.
Correct, proper religion to begin with.
Can you guys hear this? I can't hear it for some reason.
Whatnot, and then
oh, there we go. Give me a second, guys. We are having some technical difficulties. That tends to happen when I'm cooking. Everybody's conspiring
and the
against
other
me.
sects of Christianity.
Is this proof that Islam is true? Okay, let me try. Let me try a different earphone. Let's hope this works. Okay. Let's go. The Bluetooth device is connected successfully.
Other this and that.
Right.
And one of my friends said to me that I didn't even put Islam on the list because I just assumed there is no way that is right. But after looking,
he has a Muslim friend, guys. He has a Muslim convert friend. That's the point.
At all the other major faiths, there was nothing left other than Islam. And the more I read, I couldn't refute anything. This is number 9, congruence. I couldn't refute anything. It just
I know a guy who couldn't refute anything against Christianity. Therefore, Christianity is true. That's essentially, what he's saying.
Made sense to me until he ends up embracing it, right? So this is by process of elimination. If all the rest are wrong, by process of elimination, only one is left right. Now, there are others as well. This is the tentative 10 list. There are others that are going to come. Here's my point. With this, I conclude. Open the floor for Q&A. You can prove Islam by all of these 10 or by some of them. And for some people, certain points are going to resonate more than other points. All of them point towards Islam. No other faith would be able to have such a long list as we do.
No other faith will overwhelm you with bullshit as we do. That's essentially what he's saying.
Might have partially. No other faith would have the compelling evidences within these 9 as strong as we do. Sure, others have partially. So cumulatively put together, as we said, the diverse...
Essentially, the more you yap, the more you overwhelm people, the more right you are. All you need is one, Yasir. You don't need 10 half-baked reasons, which, as he said, if you don't have faith, then these won't convince you. So at the end of the day, if we do this as a mathematical formula, open parentheses, A plus B plus C and so on, 10 variables, close parentheses, times X. X is faith. You see what I'm saying here? So if every one of these is a number, whatever number that is, multiplied by x, that's the part that matters the most. If x is 0, if faith is 0, then all the evidence equals 0. 0. And yet, even all the evidence is 0 in and of itself. So if you open the parentheses, you have 0 plus 0 plus 0 plus 0 multiplied by x. So even if I have faith, it's faith multiplied by 0. It's a cumulative, as the magnificent G-Man says, it's a cumulative bullshit sandwich.
Of arguments and the strength of each argument and the overlapping consensus of all of them put together. This is how we know Islam to be definitively yaqini true. And
what does that even mean in the overlapping consensus? So you made a bunch of arguments that say Islam is true, and the overlap is that they all say Islam is true? The hell? What? Like, what's the overlap between Islam has a miraculous book and Muhammad was a great dude? How do these two overlap except in the sense that both of them are claiming that Islam is true? Do you want to, like, the 10 claims that you made, the 10 so-called proofs that you presented to not overlap? How is that even possible? Yaqini true, he says.
Only way you can deny it is if your level of skepticism is so high that every single genre of evidence presented to you, you will poke holes based upon that until you will be left exactly where you began, not having solved any of the questions of life, not having a religion. Go back to point number one, part number one, having religion.
So part number one, essentially, is he's saying having a religion is necessary and having a religion is better than not having a religion. He claims to have proved that in another video. I don't believe that. Or he claims that quality of life goes up when you have a religion. Also debatable. But if you then rely on having a religion is better than not having a religion, even then, even if I give him that, there are other religions that you could have that are better for you and others around you than Islam. Not that they are also true or true at all. So it's just BS on top of BS. He says the only reason you wouldn't be convinced of my BS is arrogance. The only reason.
Not having done all of that, and you're still wandering arrogantly, and that is a sign not of skepticism, but of arrogance. The root of rejecting Islam, after all of this has been presented to you, is not because the evidence doesn't add up, because as I said, the evidence does add up cumulatively. The root cause of rejecting Islam is arrogance. Once you understand that, you cannot debate foolishness.
You cannot debate foolishness. You can't really disprove foolishness. Like, I've been trying, but am I the fool? Am I the fool for even attempting? If I had the time, I could clip, if somebody has the time out there, feel free. I could clip every time he repeated arrogance. The only reason is arrogance. He said that 12 times. Why would you need to say something 12 times, ever, in the same video? Why? Like, maybe I have said things 12 times, but they're only a response to him saying things 12 times. Why would you need to yap so much and repeat yourself to keep saying, my people who don't believe me are haters? Everyone who disagrees is a hater 12 times. Why? Except if that you're insecure and you're bullshitting. The king of BS right here.
You cannot argue with stupidity. You cannot present evidence to somebody who doesn't want to see evidence exactly as Allah says. If we opened up the skies, if all the angels came down, if the dead were resurrected, وَكَلَّمَهُمُ الْمَوْتَى, and they spoke to them قُبُلًا, face to face, they would still not believe.
And I said, if Muhammad resurrected and came in front of me, I would destroy him in a debate, and then everybody would leave Islam. Is that convincing to everybody? Is that argument? If we're imagining things at this point, is that an argument? You can't cite an imaginary scenario and say that's your evidence. And he dares to say you can't argue with stupid. I never make a video saying, if you watch my videos, I never say, here's why Islam is false, and you're stupid if you ever believe that. And yet their default position is, if you don't believe my nonsense, you're stupid and arrogant. I haven't even insulted him enough for the amount of insults that he's hurled towards the other, towards us. Um, but yeah, stupidity is you, Yasir. Like I feel pity for you. Like on an honest human note, I feel pity for you because you have invested your entire life, your online persona, your career, your education, your money, your livelihood into being a symbol for Islam, and you went through a crisis of faith. He talks about the preservation of Islam now as a point for the Quran and for Islam. He was the one. He was the one who said the preservation narrative has holes. So he must be internally conflicted, or he must be living like a zombie. I feel sorry for him. And the most he could do is insult other people because they are not buying his BS.
Now you understand.
Yes,
so
I do.
when somebody asks, what is the proof for Islam? Put the question back and say, are you willing to accept proofs when they're presented to you? That is the question that must be asked, because whoever is sincere will find answers in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or all 10 of these. And with that, inshallah, we have around 10 minutes or so we don't.
He answers some Q&A that's not exactly about, the first part that we just covered. And I still want to, respond to that anyway. So let's watch it.
Don't have the iPad, do we? So Bismillah, we do have the iPad. Did you scan the? Raise your hand, sisters. First, any quick question?
Okay,
He
let's
wills.
listen to a question.
We will have an entire section, no matter what era you live in, right? Free will persists
Okay,
of our
let's hear this
series
question.
here, because even though it's modern theology, how do we connect free will with the question of Allah guides whom He wills? Yes, one of the good questions, free will. How do we connect free will with the question of Allah guides whom He wills? We will have an entire section on free will and predestination in this series. That's a part of our series here, because even though it's modern theology, 2 or 3 questions haunt all aspects of theology, no matter what era you live in, right? And free will and predestination is one of them. No matter what era you live in, questions of free will.
He is so good at saying, I will do a video on that. I will answer that later. I will get into that later. We can have a discussion about that. But that's a real good question. How do you reconcile God's will with free will? And God saying, or God allegedly saying in a verse, that he guides who he wills and misguides who he wills. Then the fault is on God. That's inconsistent theology that he was talking about earlier, right? He was saying it's all consistent. It isn't. But every time it isn't, and a Muslim asks about that, they're given the runaround about, oh, we'll talk about that later. It's so complex. You need years of study to understand that.
Persist. However, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says very clearly, فَمَنْ شَاءَ فَلْيُؤْمِنْ وَمَنْ شَاءَ فَلْيَكْفُرْ. Whoever wants to can believe, whoever wants to can disbelieve.
But isn't that God contradicting himself? He, again, talking about consistency. There's a verse that says, يَهْدِي مَنْ يَشَاءُ وَيَضُلُّ مَنْ يَشَاءُ. God guides who he wants, as in he as in God, and misguides who he wants. And then this other verse that says, if you want to, you can believe. If you don't want to, you won't believe. Which is it? God's contradicting himself.
So there is an element of what we would call free will, or if you want to be pedantic, what is perceived to be free will, which in all effects is free will. Our perception is reality. What we perceive is reality for us. And
so if I perceive, I mean, I agree with the spirit of the point, but if he perceives, jinn talking to him, then I guess that's his reality.
We perceive our lives as having ultimate free will, even though in the realm of ghaib, it is not the case. So
this is a very good point. He says we have the illusion of free will, and effectively, in reality, that's as good as we can get towards free will. But in reality, like with God, we don't, because God knows everything. So we don't have free will. Thank you for answering the goddamn question instead of saying it's complicated and we do, but we don't.
Since our perception is reality, and we perceive our existence with free will, we act as if we have free will, because for all intents and purposes, we do have free will.
No, we don't. Not for all intents and purposes. If you just said that God says he decides, how do we have free will? If we're playing out a play, perceiving that we have free will when the reality is, as you've correctly described, that we don't, that doesn't mean that we actually do. It means that we're deluded into thinking that we do. So we don't have free will. Anyway, we're kind of going around in a circle. Let's just...
Even though in the realm of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah is God. And a God wouldn't be a God if you can outwit God.
That's what I'm saying. So he's agreeing with us. We don't have free will because God ultimately knows and controls everything. So this is all a play. This is all like God pulling on strings, and we think that we're pulling the strings ourselves. I don't believe in free will for a whole other reason. Not because I think God is pulling on our strings. I think if this whole story is true, then we wouldn't have free will because God is above everything. But take God out of the equation, I don't think we have free will because there's so much influence that we have no control over that goes into our every next thought and every decision. And trends are our thing for a reason. Influence is something that to a large extent we cannot control. I don't think we have free will. He thinks we do, except he just said we don't.
So we cannot have ultimate free will, or else we would be mini gods. So we're going to come back to this point, inshallah ta'ala. Jayyid. Question here. Oh my God. Husband, wife stuff again. Okay, here's a good question here. Can you clarify? A lot of people are asking about your comments about the madhabs and Islamic law. So, yeah, I mean, I have said this very clearly. I advise all of you to follow an authority whom you trust. In fact, I don't advise you. I mandate upon you that unless you are a mujtahid yourselves, you must follow somebody who's a mujtahid.
Unless you are a scholar of Islam who, does ijtihad as in not jihad, ijtihad, which means like puts effort and comes up with fatwas himself and stuff and comes up with conclusions. He mandates that you follow a man of knowledge that you trust. What does that mean though? This actually highlights a huge problem even within the Islamic paradigm. Even as a well-meaning Muslim, you don't get your knowledge of Islam from the book, even if you speak Arabic. You don't get your knowledge from the books. You get your knowledge through a guy who speaks on behalf of the books that speak on behalf of God. And the books are also, the Quran is the Quran, the Hadith are stories of the Prophet, there are books of fiqh, books of jurisprudence, that's the work of other men. So it's men under men under men, and then you go to the man and you're like, what do I do in this situation? So even if you're a Muslim, at the end of the day, you're getting your knowledge from other men who've inserted their understanding and opinion into everything. God has failed utterly at delivering his message, that to this day, to understand what he means, we have to go through the work of other men. And Yasir's advice is find a man that you trust and follow him. And that's what leads a lot of people to utter despair. If you are an idiot, like you're meant to be an idiot because you don't have all the knowledge, you could go and who has the time really the time and the luxury to pause their life and making money and surviving, to go get a whole degree in Islam, to then ask that question and answer it themselves. Most people will just go to the guy with a beard and be like, hey, what do I do? So at the end of the day, guys with beards are leading people. And that's the best thing that he can offer. Go follow a guy with a beard. God has failed utterly to give us his message. If we have to go ask guys with beards, who sometimes could be perverts, sometimes could be terrible people, sometimes could be misguided. So even if I were to believe in Islam, this is such a failed system.
Somebody who has studied Islam to a level that they're comfortable giving you fatwas. You have only two options. There is no third option. Either you train yourselves to become fuqaha and scholars, and that's the door's open. Anybody wants to go study, go study. Or if you haven't studied, you must follow an authority. Who you follow is up to you. And there's a whole spectrum of people to follow. And if you wish to follow a person who follows a madhab, that is the default historically. No problem. That is the norm.
A madhab is a school of thought or a school of jurisprudence. And I think I've watched this segment. What he's saying is you can't pick and choose rulings on issues from different schools of thoughts, which a lot of Muslims do that, by the way. I don't have an opinion on which one you should do, but the way that he's describing it is restrictive. He says, when you commit to a sheikh or an imam or whatever, who has or adheres to a certain school of thought, you follow the rulings in that school of thought. You don't pick and choose and choose another school that has an easier rule of rule or school of thought, another school of thought that has an easier rule on a certain issue, and you decide which one you want from different things. And he says, because you don't get to decide based on how easy or hard things are. And yet, preachers say that Islam is easy, and sometimes they say it's hard. I think this is all stupid. You don't go follow other people to tell you what they think God meant and what God said to some guy in a cave. So how do you even select and identify that this guy is trustworthy to get knowledge from? Well, that's based on how you feel.
Normative tradition of Islam, no problem. And as a default, I would say go for it, no problem. And I am somebody who has come from studying a madhab, and I respect the madhab tradition. And I say, as a default, it is healthy to follow a madhab. That having been said, understand as well, for some people who have trained, they are comfortable basically going on another path that
Let's skip this
is
part.
a different philosophy. And this is another trend which invented. And as I explained to you, that this is the trend that I myself find. But inshallah, I have earned the right to do that after having this time. You can't ask me because I've already chosen my path. The Sheikh was trustworthy and the most aware of the text and the context.
How do you know that a sheikh is most trustworthy? Like, he says things as if that's it's easily defined. It's kind of like when they say Muhammad was the most trustworthy man and everyone thought he was trustworthy. Your perception of someone's trustworthiness is not reliable. Heck, a lot of people might think I'm trustworthy. Maybe I'm not. And that's why I tell you to go, double check everything I say. Don't take my word as Bible, as gospel, as Bible. I don't know. So choose a trustworthy sheikh. How? Allah knows best.
So you make that decision and respect the context as well.
Okay.
Islam is not based upon bargains and the easiest. Be consistent in, not somebody who gives you an easier fatwa. You may change your fatwa. It's simply like a doctor. You go to a general doctor. Sharia is not based upon which fatwa is more difficult, which fatwa is more easy. Don't base your religion on harshness. That's the way things are. As a default, the bulk Arabist, and I explained that this is a good question. I'm going to summarize it here. That you said that I have dealt with people in the past who had same-sex attractions, and how often do they go on to lead straight-oriented lives? Thank you for this for your advice here. So there is a group that is an online group that deals with this reality. What is the name of it? Straight Struggles. What is it called?
This reality. This reminds me of a sketch. I don't know if this is actually based on a real group. It probably is, unfortunately, of some kind of Mormon or Christian group that labels same-sex attraction as, like instead of saying I'm gay, I suffer from same-sex attraction, but I act straight. So the way that they see it, the way that Islam rules on it, God creates you. Now they at least acknowledge God creates some people with gay inclinations, but it's your job not to act on it. And this saddens me that it's not just about sex. It's about love. It's about companionship. It's about how you view yourself, how the world views you. It's not just about hooking up. And I want to make that very clear. People make it seem as if like, oh, so just don't go out and hook up. No, but like, can you tell straight people don't ever get married? Most Muslims want to have companionship, or if they choose to, if they want to, they can, if they're straight. But then they tell gay people or people who suffer from same-sex attraction, don't act on it. Let's hear what he has to say.
Straight struggles?
Straight struggles. They struggle to be straight.
Struggles, I think that's the one.
Okay.
There's nothing to laugh about here. He should know these facts. These are good facts to know.
I appreciate his bit of maturity there, but I have to highlight, like, people were giggling about it. Men who like men, girls who like girls. That's crazy.
Is it straight struggle? Is it straight? Can you look it up quickly? I think that is one. Anyway, I interacted with them because I gave my whole lecture about this, that 20 years ago, when it was still politically correct to make crass comments about same-sex attractions, I made a crass joke. I made an insensitive joke in class. Very dumb, kids do that. Youngsters do that. Alhamdulillah.
Wait a second. he will talk about how it was wrong of him to make that crass jokes on the expense of gay people or people who experience same-sex attraction. But he also paints it as like it's not my fault. It was politically correct to make fun of him, and I sympathize with that. I don't expect him to have been a better person than the people and the influences around him, but I take issue with how he, you know, throws things under the bus of political correctness when it suits him. So earlier he was talking about how some things seem to clash with political correctness. So political correctness essentially is not actually a valid metric of anything, and it's useless, it's stupid, right? But then here he seems to indicate the opposite, that back when it was politically correct to make fun of or make more crass jokes, it's still very politically correct in a lot of Muslim communities to degrade and make fun of gay people. He sees some humanity in it from like a proselytizing angle, and we'll see that in a second. But he says it was politically correct to make jokes. Now it's not. So he acknowledges that it not being correct to make politically correct to make crass jokes about gay people is a good thing, in a sense. So he endorses political correctness, and yet sometimes goes against it and says, "Well, I'm sorry that slavery is not politically correct or whatever." Is crab a fish? Thanks for the super chat. They say, for a guy named Yasir Qadhi, as in judge, he sure judges people. How ironic. So yeah, now Yasir's a wokey. Not quite, and we'll hear him out talking about that joke that he made.
That wasn't recorded, thank God. But I made a dumb joke in class. Really crass, stupid joke. Everybody laughed. And somebody wrote me a letter, literally handwritten. And he said, Sheikh, your comments really hurt. And you have to understand that there are people who are struggling with these temptations, and they love Allah and His Messenger, and they know it's wrong, and they're trying to overcome it, and your attitude doesn't help. Wallahi, that was like a punch in my stomach, and I'll never forget how I felt. I felt
So I give him partial credit for having some kind of empathy, but it's qualified empathy, right? It's yeah. Thank you, Night Vine, for highlighting this. It was a bad joke, but everybody laughed. By the way, it was a bad joke, and I take it back. But everybody laughed. He had to emphasize that he was such a funny guy, that he wants the social credit for making a good politically incorrect joke. He has empathy only solely because a Muslim reached out to him and said, I am fighting my gayness, and I love Muhammad and I love Allah, and you hurt me, and things like this could, detract or like discourage people from being or continuing to be Muslim. So his concern is just like, I don't want to hurt gay Muslims who are trying not to be gay, right? Like his concern is not gay people are human beings and I shouldn't be making jokes at their expense and systemically punching down, because I know that could possibly lead to extreme violence. Forget the ostracization and the othering and the social suicide of somebody coming out in a Muslim country or Muslim community, even in the West. His concern is not that this could encourage violence against gay people and normalize the hatred of them. His concern was, but the gays who really lash themselves on the back metaphorically and try and force themselves to continue to love Allah, I don't want to hurt them. So partial credit for having any semblance of empathy, but you still missed the mark. You shouldn't be making these jokes not because is it a net positive or net negative for Islam, but more like because people, because human beings, because empathy. Forget whether it's a sin or not. Thank you for the super chat. Songs of Deprivation. They say, if you had taken care of global warming and rising sea levels, we wouldn't have jihadi violence. Look for all the reasons except Islam. Interesting. I've heard this perspective before, which is that political, economical factors and climate factors contribute to extremism and more like violence and factions and militia and so on, and that could be a factor into religious extremism. I don't necessarily disagree with that. I think there's way more to the existence of extremist terrorist groups and militia in the Middle East and other parts of the world than just because Islam says violent things. There's a lot more to it than that. There's also funding, there's also influence, there's also climate factors as well. I agree. But so it's important to remind people that there are many factors, but it's also important to address the factors that we can control, and hopefully also the other ones we can control them in the future. Anyway, what does he say again about this gay joke?
So bad. So, and I should be. It taught, and there was an email address, an anonymous email address. So I started corresponding. This was 15 years ago, 17 years ago. This person introduced me to an online community around the world, all anonymous users. They're struggling with same-sex attraction. They know it's not right, and they're trying to overcome it. So
See, this is why I'm very cognizant not to give him too much credit and not to say, bravo, Sheikh, you have empathy. Because to them, it's a same-sex attraction is a struggle that you have to fight against rather than just like it's as if I told Yasir Qadhi, you need to fight the urge to be intimate with your wife. I don't know if he's married or not. This is not a dig at his real family. If he has a wife, you need to not touch your wife. You need to actually not be with your wife, divorce her, because that's haram. Because God doesn't like it when you put your pee-pee in a woman. If that was my justification, would he like that? Would he think that's reasonable at all? No, he wouldn't. So why does God, who has excuses as pathetic as, I'd give you proof, but you're going to deny it anyway. I'd show you myself, but I'm shy. He didn't say that, but I'd show you myself, but I'd have to kill you. Why should we listen to such an entity that isn't brave enough to show itself? It's not real. It's just the hypotheses and delusions of men. And those same men decided that you should fight your same-sex attraction. I don't think you should. I think you should love who you love, find healthy relationships regardless of what the gender of the other person is or yours, and don't try to force yourself to be straight, and please don't force yourself to get married in a straight relationship and pretend to be straight. There are some people who are attracted to both genders or all genders, and for them, maybe they can get away with it. That's a whole other struggle. Like someone could be bi, for example. They could be with a woman and they can live fine and have children and everything. But there are people who are even repulsed by the idea of sex with the opposite gender, but they force themselves and they inadvertently involve another person and a family into it. And that's not fair to them either. So it's a difficult position to be in. I don't envy any person with attraction to the same gender as a Muslim or in a religious community. I'm not demonizing them for wanting to survive, but it's not a solution to just shove the gay back into yourself and just try to be straight.
you're not alone. This is a reality, and nobody should minimize or diminish this reality. It is a struggle, and may Allah make it easy for you. I have interacted with this community for a while. Many of them still have my email address, so they email me once in a while. I actually met one of them, one of the founders of that movement. He emailed me, said, I don't mind meeting you in person, such and such city. I went and visited him, and he told me himself that even though the feelings are still there, he has overcome them. He is now married. He has children, and he's very happy, alhamdulillah, that he had interacted and heard my lectures and whatnot. So,
and it's easy to think of like such a success case with air quotes. Well, again, the person could be bi and maybe they could have been satisfied with having either partner for the rest of their life. Or it could be that they're, straight and forcing themselves. If you take away the threat of hell and the threat of God disapproving of your actions and the disgust that people would look at you with, just the mere idea of gayness, if you take all of that away, would that person have been just as happy or happier pursuing a relationship with the same gender? Very, very likely, if not for sure. But if you put the constraints of the entire community and your entire world demonizes you, of course you're going to be happier cosplaying as a straight person. Of course. So is that a success story? To me, it's sad. Like I hope for his sake that person's just bi and they're okay. They're not missing out on love or intimacy. But there are many cases where it takes, even not just in Muslim communities, in other religious communities, in other non-religious communities, when the homophobia is that intense, there are people who end up doing things to, make up for that, to satisfy that urge in ways that aren't as healthy. It comes out anyway. So don't try to force yourself to be straight. And I hope that everyone can find the community and the space to be themselves. I think that's it for the video. There's no point in listening to the closing remarks. I don't think he says anything else that is worth listening to at this point. Thank you, everyone, for bearing with me through another one of those. I'll do another live stream, maybe dissecting another lecture by somebody else. Feel free to leave the suggestions in the comments. Links will usually be removed, auto removed in the comments, so don't leave a link, but do leave the title of a talk or the name of the sheikh and so on. Thank you, everyone, for watching, for listening. And as always, thanks to the Discord members and donors and patrons for supporting this channel and making this possible. I could not do this without you. And as always, think critically and think for yourself and consider watching one of these videos next.